epigenetics and external factors to influence what the outcome in life can be for you or for people around you. And so Francesca is the founder of an organization called WIN. The organization seeks to empower women economically and in all other manners. Francesca is actually a philosopher by nature, and so these kinds of topics is close to her heart, and she speaks passionately about it. Francesca has experienced a lot of GBV in her personally and in her life, and she's an activist to ensure, that things change for survivors of GBV or people, children, adults that are exposed to GBV. Um, she was involved in the development of the new laws, and she has now been part of the pillar or the period of the NSP to ensure that interventions for survivors is available. So, Francesca, you can take over. I'm not sure if we want to give people another few minutes. Like I said, I know from our side we are experiencing load shedding, and it affects the systems a little bit. But if it is in order, Francesca, you can proceed, or you can decide to, wait a few minutes more. Thank you.
Thank you, Hanunisha, for that wonderful introduction. Good afternoon, everybody present already. Shall I say, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues and friends. We are all affected by load shedding, and I'm very grateful that everything on my system opened today. I think let us give it until about 10 past, if people don't mind. Is everybody in agreement? Can we give it until 10 past? Then I will start immediately.
I'm sure we can wait for 10 more minutes.
Can you see my presentation?
Yes, we can, Francesca.
Oh, fantastic, fantastic. So I'm going to continue. As Anisha already said, I'm Francesca Fonse. I'm currently involved in various studies globally, and part of the studies is the study of epigenetics. Epigenetics is a new field of sciences which was only formally recognized in 1988. Epigenetics gives us the opportunity to understand our genetic lineage, our chromosomal configuration, and how environmental stimulus interact with those genetic dispensations when we feel under threat. Today, we are addressing the epigenetics that comes down through our lineage, which can affect us for 4 to 8 generations, and how those internalized in the genome configuration of a human being then leads us to various genetic dispensations which can manifest as linear disease like diabetes that runs in a family, or psychological matter that runs in a family, but also affects our behavioral dispensations as we get triggered in a trauma response. I have done a previous webinar on this subject, but I have changed the webinar today. In time, we will upload all the webinars on the Department of Justice's YouTube site, and I will email it to everybody that I know, and also so will the department, and I'm sure there will be links on the department's website so that people may access this information when you wish to visit it again in future. I'm going to apologize a little bit in advance. I have had some serious surgery inside my mouth this year, and I am aware of the fact that my tongue sometimes gets in the way and I lisp a little. I'm not drunk, I'm not on drugs. I am seriously struggling to feel normal again. Thank you so much for understanding. Let us look at the subconscious traumas and how through linear embedment these traumas can resurface as manifested ancestral and generational GBV, and it requires healing. There's a slight difference between ancestral and generational. Generational is a trigger trauma that happens to manifest through epigenetics, and I will explain it in a bit. That is something that happens in the home environment. In other words, it gets passed from parents to their children, to their great-grandchildren, because of something that happened in the close family environment. Ancestral traumas are collective traumas that we experience in terms of our ethnicity, our nationality, and really large scope traumatic experiences. Examples thereof are tribal conflict, the 2 world wars, the Holocaust, slavery in context. I would in my next webinar, that is on Wednesday, the biology of trauma, I will address slavery, because everybody on our planet, every race has dealt with slavery at some stage in the global and in the Gaia history. So I'm not there to speak about that today. I'm talking about children. You are a child, you are born. Not only do you have to traverse the environmental environment that you've been born into, and the stimulus and also the trigger responses that could be part of this environment, but you are born with a dispensation, a genome dispensation, that if there's nobody to help you and to guide you and to teach you a different set of values under extreme stressful circumstances, these dispensations can manifest. And the different kinds of trauma that affect our lineage, our DNA, our RNA, if we are exposed to it and we have not been accessed to healing modalities or to circumstances that could assist us to heal, are the ones that you see in front of you. Mental trauma. A mental trauma is a feeling of threat and danger when you feel out of control, when you're feeling trapped, brain fog, and lack of focus. Very often, mental trauma, because of the overthought and the overthinking, can lead to extreme depression and eventually to the psychosis where people take their own lives. Psychological trauma is another form of depression, anxiety, emotional distress, and thoughts of attempts at suicide. So everything to do with your upper trauma, your mental, your psychological trauma, your underlying psychosis that could, in the event that no help finds you in time, could lead for people committing suicide. We've got other behavioral traumas like eating disorders. Smoking is actually a behavioral disorder. Sleeping disorders, sexual behavior, physical inactivity nobody has been born to be physically inactive. The first thing a child starts to do when it can and it's got strength enough is crawl, and after crawling is walking. So extreme physical inactivity is not a natural state for a human being to be in. Then we have suppressed traumas. Suppressed traumas very often leads to substance abuse, because suppressed trauma really affect the person's self-esteem in the deepest way. And suppressed trauma can use to alcohol abuse, drug abuse, smoking, and promiscuity, actually. Then we have internalized trauma. Internalized trauma very often affect women. And internalized trauma leads to a low self-esteem, which very often in an abusive marriage can lead to economic abuse. Very often, when there's no self-value, then we are very much open to abuse. Physical trauma is actually your trauma that is the most easily healed and recovered from. When you fall and break an arm or a leg, or when there's domestic violence and there's physical trauma in a moment when somebody was drunk and hurt somebody who couldn't control their temper, as long as it's not consistent, that could be more easily healed than, for instance, emotional suppressed trauma and psychological trauma. We can address trauma lodged at cellular level today, as we can teach so many different techniques to our children, but also for us as adults, because we need to heal first so that we can assist our children to heal, which might affect the whole home and family environment. Dissidents manifest during daily activities in the school space, for instance, through bullying, aggressive interactions, avoidance of family, non-performance in academics and sports. There's many reasons why it presents itself like that, and I will allude to that in just a moment. Okay, the construct of triggers, prejudices, and how gender-based violence manifests. When we look at the construct of society and how we as society really ascribed to the macho male image, then we should not be surprised that our social, our religious, and our cultural constructs are found on the differences between men and women, rather than what we are both bringing to the table, which are positive. But now it is focused on the biological differences, because we as a society, and through patriarchy, through centuries, normalized macho behavior through attitudes and our own conscription to it as men, women, and that is what we pass on to our children. Then when we look at the sexual triggers, that's your sex is basically, it refers to your biology and your physiological differences, whether you're male or female by nature. Your gender relates to your social differences, your values, and how it educates roles and responsibilities between women, men, girls, and boys, and how diversion often leads to tension. And gender also then comes highly into play when we have gender diversion, when we have LGBTIQ community, when we have gender non-conscriptive people. That is when trauma triggers really can arise here in terms of gender. It includes activities ascribed to men and women based on our perceived differences. And I've often wondered, why are we so set as a humanity on how much we are different and, you know, how we are actually functioning in the world? There's so much focus on our differences rather than what we have in common and how we can contribute to one another. Now, teaching our children a different set of values, that is up to us as parents. It is up to educators, and it is actually up to a government department like Department of Justice in setting perimeters and new ways of understanding through adjusting our laws to be more victim-centric, but or human-centric in a way, so that we can start to think and actually deliberate why we have such a social division in our sexes. Why is it so deeply embedded in our consciousness? What is patriarchy? What is the resulting influences of it, especially after it's been in effect for so many centuries? How can we undo and reorganize the stereotypical aspects of male roles and female roles? And actually, how within our families do we create a new understanding of economy and society? How do we now, as the current parents, the future parents, the educators of today, set new roles of behavior, new laws, new expectations in place to undo the damage that has been done for the last centuries? When we are looking at the stereotypical roles, the biological determination of sexual and reproductive roles, the cultural allocations that we have bought into. An active girl is very often assumed butch, whether she's from the gay dispensation in terms of her gender identification or not. The generational violence that stemmed from that, when we try to put people in little boxes when there has never been a box. What is the generalized views and our preconceptions about the attributes or characteristics on our structured sets of beliefs and behaviors, our roles, what ought to be performed by women and what ought to be performed by men? What is the rape culture and how does it rationalize? When a male child is brought up believing that the male gender is the stronger gender to the female gender, it ultimately translates to gender inequality in the workplace, because that is the frame of mind that the male person will then take further throughout her life. And what is very very important is that we nip this in the bud in our youth, as young as we can have them, because the younger they are, the more successful we will be to reconstruct mindset and to assist people to move away from their inherited triggers. In other words, their genetic, ancestral and generational dispensation, and to adopt a new set of values that can help us bring peace between the sexes, be more tolerant of gender, and to do away with the stereotypical environment that ultimately leads to inequality for women and girls identifying as female in so many tiers of our society. And here I want to say, because it is a child growing up in this construct that society has normalized, then we don't understand why an adult thinks to use sexual favor in the workplace against a female for her to retain her job and her promotion, or to deserve equal pay. The moment that happens, that is a rape culture that has been normalized, because no woman wants to go through to study in university or to acquire a skill so that she can go and work for a company where she has to sleep with a man in order to keep her job, to look after her family, or to be advanced. No woman starts off that way. So that, for every man ever listening to this in future, is you're part of a rape culture. It's a normalized thing that is spread into every tier of society. It's in politics, it is in business, it is everywhere, and it's got to stop. Gender stereotypes are based on the exaggerated images of women I see every day, and we all see it. But remember, this is a personal choice. we see so many women change their physical appearance and very often even their persona to please men, because patriarchy has trained us that women must compete with one another and that we are there to compete for the favor of men. No, my sister, you are there to compete with you. You are there to raise your children the best way you can, to understand what has been dubbed the battle of the sexes for generations, to understand that only in the late 19th century, laws changed that girls could inherit from their fathers. To understand that in 1948, the United Nations declared gender inequality a criminal act, and we are still talking about it 75 years later. And I'm asking every woman and every man who is worth his manhood to step up and look at what we are dealing with. Look what we are transferring to our children, to the extent that we have young children that are not adults today committing sexual offenses and rape, today engage in criminal activity, commit murder. We've never had this before. And not to the extent where it is really screaming at us as a society. And it is because of generational neglect of healing, generational neglect of in-depth understanding of our humanity. We have just come through COVID. COVID, you know, there's even these conflicting theories that had society, different people pitched against each other. And it's because we are in a trigger response, the trauma response. When you are able, and this is what we are supposed to teach our children, when you feel that threat, how do you get to the rational? How do you get to the point where you think, okay, there's now this virus, it's COVID, and you know, we need to prepare for it and we need to adjust our behavior to overcome it the best way possible. Indulging in all kinds of conspiracies and theories is not going to change it. Being responsible gives you the best way of survival, no matter, you know, how it originated or not originated. So that is what we need as society. That is what we need as parents. That is what we need as educators. That is what we need as governments. We need to unlock our children's potential through stimulus and emotional responses and training them how to deal with it. Because if we don't, we can either unlock them or their responses can destroy them. And when you look at the screen, the balance and wellness of any human being really is about all these aspects. So how you can socially interact, how do you feel balanced emotionally, spiritually, how do you understand your environment? Are you being taught anything about your environment? Do you throw rocks at birds? You know, do you want to hurt animals? There's something wrong with that. If you have an inherent trigger response to that and nobody's taught that to you, please look at your ancestry. There's something that needs to be healed. Our occupational, in other words, our work relationship, our financial status, our intellect, our physical, very much and very often. If you look at great people who today we know was probably dyslexic, great people that through the schooling system were overlooked because they were assumed to be stupid, because they didn't confine to this parrot learning way of that was prevalent to schools for so long, and in a great extent is still prevalent today. It's just amazing how, and even that, when you look at dyslexia, when you look at ADD, ADHD, when you look at autism, all those has got a genetic origin in an inflammatory response that was not healed and thus manifested as a genome, an external non-genetic factor that affected the genome configuration and would then be transferred in the lineage of a certain family. If we look at children, what do they need? If we look at children, and what does a child need not to adhere to the probable genetic dispensation or probable behavioral dispensation that is locked up in his or her genome configuration? They need balanced knowledge systems and information. They need to experience. A child needs to feel safe making a mistake, and they need to feel acknowledged when they achieve. And what does that mean? I have seen in my life so many parents, when a child makes a mistake, the parents say to the child, don't play on the merry-go-round. It goes too fast, you're going to fall or whatever, or don't climb in the tree. And the child does it. And now the child falls from the tree and breaks an arm. Now the one parent is now, I told you not to do it, you don't have ears, you don't listen. And it's this whole rhetoric of this poor child really dismantling its safety between this child and that parent, with a parent that jumps up and rushes to take the child to the hospital and puts the welfare, how do I prevent my child from further pain of this child first? That child feels safe. Yes, you can say to the child later, now you see you've got a broken arm. Next time think what I tell you and listen. There's so many ways of making the child understand, or asking the child, mommy has warned you, you've not listened, what happened? Can you now see for yourself what can go wrong? So it becomes the child's experience and not the parent's hysteria. How do we inspire confidence in our children? How do we inspire a willingness to try in our children? There's so many people today that say, my children are adults already and they're still staying and they're just not launching. Why? How did you raise your child, maybe, that made them fearful of trying, of expressing? There's such a lot that needs to be done. And when we do compare our family values, our family responses to triggers, Is there open-mindedness? Our open-mindedness or our understanding, does it ignite consequentiality? Do you, when you talk to your child, or a teacher talk to your child, when you make a decision, when you come to a situation where you've got to make a decision, there's different avenues. Consider the possible outcomes, the consequences, and then you make your choice based on the best possible outcome with the least negative consequences. Consequentiality and consequential thinking is so lacking in our society today. It is as if people don't think. Road rage, that's a prime example of non-consequential behavior. Then expectation that we create from and on our children. What expectations do we create for them in their mindset, and what do they feel we expect from them? Are we allowing our children to be children, or in many cases, and unfortunately this is the case with single parent households, are we placing too much pressure on a child because of the lack of the responsibility of either both parents or the absence of one parent? What do we allow, especially our boy children, to watch on television? What causes external environmental stresses on them? The area that we live in, yes, not all areas are affluent, but do we train our children consequential thinking and value systems so that they don't think the gangsters are cool, but think, that reading a book is nice? Because reading a book, somebody can make a television program or a movie of a book, and that produces interpretation of that book. But when you read the book, that book is yours. It's for your imagination. You can recreate the story completely. What do we teach our children? Do we instill a love of reading in children? How does it happen? By reading to them when they are little. There's so much of what we do as parents that becomes generational. And when we look, for instance, at attachment trauma, and we have to think, what is attachment trauma? Attachment trauma can be a huge subconscious trauma for a child, which later explains a lot of violence, especially against the mother and the aunts of that generation, especially can be a male or a boy child. Attachment trauma refers to bonding, your first bonding of any child. And this is a vast area, my goodness, is in the womb, because that child is completely dependent on that mother, even on her neurological system. So if you are pregnant and you have negative thoughts about this pregnancy and your partner, and you watch, this violent kind of nonsense on television, and you read all kinds of stuff and follow all kinds of Pinterest clips and stuff that all contains forms of violence, and you don't take care of yourself, you are violating your child. When you drink alcohol, when you're pregnant, when you expose yourself and that unborn child to external violence, when you maybe go, unfortunately, through domestic violence whilst you're pregnant, that is the first bonding traumas that may occur. Drug abuse, anything that can so not that affects that child genetically. so much, but also when it's born, it will have that as a genome dispensation that could be triggered towards a violent orientation. And then your second form of bonding trauma is when the child is born, and that mother needs to take care of it until it can walk. And then from when it can walk until it's of an age, normally around 5 or 6, where it can dress itself and feed itself if it has to. A child which undergoes extreme neglect for the first 7 years of their lives has got so much to overcome and can be triggered in so many ways that it is not even, it's almost unthinkable that anyone can do that to their children. When we look at bonding trauma, this slide does not address bonding trauma, but please remember, a child's generational dispensation, ancestral dispensation, now you add the bonding traumas if it occurred either in the womb or in utero or after the child's born, especially the first 7 years. Now you come through life, the feeling of rejection that many of us carry one way or the other, the feeling of abandonment, betrayal, injustice. There's so many incidences that children go through in life that gives them that feeling. If this child does not have an educator in the form of either a parent or a teacher, or hopefully a good friend that can assist this child to move past the trauma response and get to the point where they can, from a logical perspective, assess the situation, then that child has got some serious challenges in life. And when children are challenged to the extent that they are challenged layer upon layer in terms of trauma, it is very easy for a child like that to lose their connection, in some of these aspects of their lives. The intellect will suffer. How they are expressing themselves socially will suffer. The emotional imbalances that a spiritual disconnect. If we don't change how we are with our children, how we treat our children, and if we don't become a responsible society and ask our social media, our televisions to bring a level of trauma, almost, what shall we say, uncovering trauma and bring to the core and to the fore what it is that we can change, then we are playing into that new construct where we normalize forms of violence that didn't exist 60 years ago, when there wasn't television, when everybody and his friend didn't have a way of broadcast and share violent images and things like that. Our children today are exposed to violence in the home. They are exposed to their ancestral dispensations and any forms of trauma triggers that they are born with, that they are carrying in that lineage. Then they have violence all around them today. You know, when On Thursdays, I'm going to speak to the biology of trauma. And as I said, I specifically want to speak more to collective biologies, like, for instance, slavery, because we are missing the point that the most vast form of slavery in the history of mankind happened in the last 35 years through human trafficking, sex trafficking. And we need to start waking up. How much of our old ancestral baggage do we want to carry into tomorrow? Or can we heal some of those and put some of those down so that we can deal with the challenges of this day? And can we overcome our prejudices? Because why should we buy into something that happened, an ethnic conflict? And I used very much often the Napoleon Wars, because many people in France today just don't like the British, and they just don't know why. And Napoleon has died hundreds of years ago. And the same on the other side of the ocean. And we've got all these irrational things that we bought into, either because of our parents or our lineage, and it's never affected you in person. The way it affects us is the buy-in we have into that, and that humanity, we are hoarders on a genetic and epigenetic and a mental level. We cling to things that are just tripping us up all the time instead of looking. And this is the thing with gender. How do we perceive gender? Is our differences positive for us? Do we focus on that? Or are we forever going to buy into patriarchy and feminism and now blame each other? When are we going to stop? And it's the same with so many wounds that is manifested and has become genetic and ancestral loads that humanity carry, and we bring this all to our children. The biology of trauma through epigenetics exposes the environmental stimulus, the conditions that arise from non-genetic influences on our genetic expressions. And we can learn when we know that every human being born comes with a whole history of mankind. Surely we can start teaching a new way of being for mankind, a new way of dealing with all that trauma, those triggers and responses. And the most wonderful thing with epigenetics, which is very close to the field of neuroscience, is that we can now assess how these triggers, how these stimulus, these influences express in our characters, our genetic material. And we can really understand why it is so absolutely essential to get rid of childhood trauma, and especially gender-based violence, because women are the carriers of the genetic material. When a ovum is fertilized in the womb, there is 4 generations of genetic material present and active in that womb. And that is how all these traumas are transferred from generation to generation. If we, humanity, can be who we are supposed to be, each other's equal, if women can be treated with respect and women can be allowed to enjoy being a woman and be respected and be a mother and be a career person and everything that we should be entitled to, then our children will be healthier, because these genetic impacts will be lessened and we won't have to struggle with that going forward in the generations to come. These 3 slides are very interesting to me. You can look at them yourself. Epigenetics and the environmental stimuli are the conditions that arise from non-genetic influences on our ancestral gene expressions, and we can get born with that. And now there's just something that I said, and this is very important. We have to change the way we educate. We have to change the way we structure our education curriculum so that we can change the behavioral programming, whether it is ancestral, whether it's current, anything that carries trauma in the unconscious mind. If we do not incorporate that at a school level, at institutional levels, then we're going to lose those children who won't have the parents that will buy into their responsibility to heal themselves and their children going forward. So how do we support and refocus challenged societies towards peace and consequential learning? We implement well-rounded, integrative approaches to student wellness with a focus on mind, body, and intellect. We implement empowerment tools, techniques, and strategies for reducing stress. They're very simple. Yes, yoga is a powerful one, but meditation. And if you don't ascribe to meditation, just conscious breathing, just breath control, just activity, being out in the sun, being able to play. There's so many tools and techniques. There's a school in Brooklyn, in New York, in 1992 that introduced EFT tapping into the school environment. And within a year, the drug lords and all the violence almost ceased. And they are still doing EFT. They start their day with the students doing EFT tapping, assisting the students to de-stress at the start of the day and taking that technique home where they can share it with their families or younger siblings, empowering them with a technique to de-stress, to get rid of trigger responses. We can enable the ambitions of our youth towards their personal development, towards their enhanced productivity and better outcomes, because it is proven that through colors, music, EFT tapping, meditation, yoga, so many modalities, that students study better, that they develop a better self-image when they are taught something that can help them to de-stress. We can empower, motivate, and create awareness with parents and their children. And we can support individuals to change high-risk behavior by offering solutions to their challenges. I'm very certain that youths who perform who perpetrates gender-based violence at an early age did not have positive role models, that very often felt abandoned, those childhood wounds, that felt not respected growing up, or the parents did not teach them about respect, or the parents did not respect this disconnect, this dissonance, where this individual separates from their emotional rationale, their intellectual rationale, and their spiritual rationale. And that, because we as society fail our children, that is why we see in this world where we are bombarding them with new impulses through television, through music with violent lyrics, television with violent imaging without the resolution where there's somebody who can direct that child's mind and make them understand what it is that they witnessed, what is right, what is wrong, and the consequentiality thereof, then we cannot be surprised that our youth is turning violent. We cannot logically expect the source or sources of trauma to be the catalyst of healing. It's impossible. Any responsible person that is a thought changer must take definitive steps to empower all ages of children the best way possible. And we must start with ourselves. Most people raise traumatized children. Very few actually raise adults. So what makes an adult different from a person that is a traumatized child in the form of an adult body is consequentiality. Can you stop before you've gone too far? Does your rational mind, is it able to intercede when your animalistic trauma response is triggered? Self-control, rationale, that is the difference between a traumatized child in the form of an adult and an actual adult. Do road rage, one of those, or two neighbors fighting because their dogs bark at each other. There's so many stupid things that people fight about and get in a tiffy about. And that is a clear indication of people who has negative trauma, subconscious trauma triggers that has never been dealt with. Epigenetics conclude that generational trauma originated as personal violence. In other words, somebody experienced it personally. In the GBV environment, it was a personal violence. Excuse me. It could have been extreme bullying. It could have been domestic violence in the family context. But when it is generational, I'm not talking about ancestral, that includes the ethnicity and the greater world history. I'm talking about generational trauma triggers. Somebody experienced it personally. And then the next generation experienced something else personally. And eventually, these became genetic dispensations within our gene lineage. Child abuse and the childhood witnessing of gender-based violence within the home are the greatest drivers to adult abusers. This is where the unconscious reference to become violent under pressure is formed. That is very often while we see that children who has been sexually molested become perpetrators as adults. It just doesn't just happen. It is these triggers, and they can be latent for many years. And we must understand, and that is why the first 7 years of a child's life, the foundation phase, is so crucial. That is literally when behavioral foundations are laid. And in those years, apart from being in the womb, how a child is taught in a minor way, but to form experience, to form the first concepts of rationale, is very much going to affect that child's ability not to be violent and to be a peaceful, constructive human being in the future. Carl Jung said, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside as fate. Healing family lines is sacred work. Healing yourself so that you can heal your children is sacred work. Healing yourself, your children, will affect your environment, because energy is energy, and you cannot have isolation when it comes to energy. When there is a school that teaches something and the majority of the children understand it and work with it, that school will become peaceful, and any forms of violence will cease. Bullying will cease. Drug abuse will cease. Depression will cease. It is just nothing happens in isolation. We've learned that with COVID. We are now learning it through the Ukrainian-Russian conflict. Nothing happens in isolation. So when we heal ourselves, we heal our ancestral lines, but we also heal our genetic lines for the future of our children and for the future of mankind, actually. Why should society work at healing our youth? Because unless we do, they will always have these subconscious triggers, and it is easier to fall into the trap of the immediate or trauma response, because emotionally it teaches that child to manage disappointment, to manage anger, to manage confusion, to literally manage his or her life better. Trauma puts us in survival mode, that trigger response. Everything feels like everybody wants to attack you. Everything feels difficult. We don't want our children to experience life like that. It is really, really important for us to heal ourselves, our society, and our youth. Understanding the environmental stimulus of parents, in other words, the person that has given you your genetic dispensation, the educators, hopefully the people that is going to assist you, to have a different perspective outside your home environment, dealing with peer pressure and the visual, the trauma triggers and the pressures of the quality of visual entertainment that we have. All those things require healing to prevent the manifestation of gender-based violence. Mental trauma, psychological trauma, behavioral trauma, suppressed trauma, internalized trauma, physical trauma. Internalized trauma, very much we can put bonding trauma under that heading. Now, what epigenetics teaches us is the external factors that affect our genetic environment. But what it also teaches us is that we do not need to be controlled by our genes like a computer. We do not. That we can understand these expressions of trauma and that we can change our state of consciousness and influence and even change completely the tendency for genome expression. We don't have to. If your great-grandfather was just say a murderer, there's no reason why you should be one. If your great-grandfather abused animals, there's no reason why what we should do is we should understand through our lineage what our probabilities are. And if we feel that uncomfortable trigger response, that mirroring, if something affects you, traumatizes you, and you need to start questioning why, because we need to recode ourselves so that we don't carry every trauma that has been in our lineage for the last thousands of years with us into the future and imprint that on our descendants. We don't need that. We can rewrite those genetic codes. And that is the wonderful thing about epigenetics. It can help us to identify, but it can also help us and gives us a new trajectory to decode ourselves, our trauma triggers, and also assist our lineage to create a better future. The Science Journal, I think this was from October 2021. This quote I took there came from the Science Journal, and it said, learning how to breathe in accordance with the body's designed rhythmic patterns aids in overcoming a state of imbalance and attaining holistic restoration. The power of conscious breathing to improve both the mind and body, in other words, would naturally spill over into spiritual improvement, leading to improved clarity, rationale, unity, fellowship, and intimacy with creation and other people. The intimacy with creation is our natural environment. So just from, I am a personal fan of breath work, and that is why I included it. But just from systematic and conscious breath work, we can already change our trauma responses. We can already start influencing our genetic dispensations to overcome the trauma trigger and go into an aspect of better rationale, better clarity, better humanity, because breathing relaxes the nervous system. And we need to access the parasympathetic nervous system, because the sympathetic nervous system is all about trauma and survival. And that is where that aggression response comes from, that subconscious. It's all in the subconscious, all those triggers of generations upon generations. And if we can breathe through them, we break that first link so that we can access our parasympathetic nervous system, which deals with the rational mind, so that we can start being rational, more responsible, and make better choices. And this is what we need to teach our youth, because we need to get our damaged youth away from all those triggers and from their genetic dispensations. And we need to give them new tools to discover who they are without the knapsacks of generational trauma that comes through our lineage, without having to carry your great-great-great-grandfather's issues without you even knowing it, because it is a subconscious trigger that you yourself don't understand. So for me as a person, I have taught all my children breath work. And I mean, if they want to do, you know, yoga and all these other very, very beneficial systems and modalities, by all means, let them do. Physical activity like gymming is very good, but unless you do it with a conscious thought behind it, it's just getting you fit and healthy. When you gym with the thought of breathing and cleansing your body whilst you're doing it, that is a different approach to going through the gym and getting fit, because now you incorporate your mind, your neurology that is part of the parasympathetic nervous system, the rationale, into getting fit. You're not just running around or doing weights just to have muscles to show. So it's all about the attitude. It's all about calming that aspect of humanity, our trigger responses, getting back to a place of improving our immune system, decreasing the inflammation in the body, which leads to a lot of hereditary diseases, to elevate our hormones. That's all. All those things can come through various tools and modalities, and we can teach children that at schools. It's very, very important, because the interconnectedness between epigenetics and the stimulus that leads to aggression exists through our genetic material. It is there, it can be provoked, and when we add on to it in this current life that this child is living, it makes it even worse. How we deal with it in the future is calling on a whole new concept of education. And one country that I know that has paid heed to this actually too is Iceland. In 2012 was plagued by drugs, and Iceland made a plan. They built this because it's very cold in winter. They built this indoor centers where children can do meditation, they can do art, they can do sporting activities, and they literally undid all that. I know Denmark and Norway have fantastic education, actually encouraging children to play more, to experience more, that experiential learning of feeling and touching and understanding. Very, very important. Now, Eleanor Roosevelt said, one's philosophy is not best expressed in words. It is expressed in the choices one makes. In the long run, we shape our lives and also the lives of our children, and we shape ourselves and also our humanity. The process never ends until we die, and the choices we make are ultimately our own responsibility. And that is why I really want these concepts taught in our educational facilities, because we now understand the layers of responses that we come into the world with, the probable layers that can be added, and how we all need some modality that allows us to deal with our stress, to de-stress, and to bring us back to what we are supposed to be, peaceful human beings. If we want our children to reach their potential and become the best that they can be, that they were created to be, teachers in an education environment could do much more than just offer learning experiences and hope that students learn what is passed to them along the way. When we teach these modalities, children's academic performance goes up, because a de-stressed child learns better than a stressed child. When we teach these children how to identify things that are consequential for their health, well-being, it's easier for a de-stressed child to go to the teacher or to appear and say, you know what, I'm experiencing violence at home, or we have this trouble at home. A trauma response shuts a child down. They cannot speak about it. Therefore, if we want to create an environment where children can come clean, can reach out for help, just teaching the ECD is not going to help them. We need to give them a tool to de-stress where they can break away from that trauma entrapment and access the rationale to approach a teacher, to approach somebody, you know, a school psychologist or somebody that is supposed to help a child to be able to speak through the traumas that they are dealing with and break that trauma response for this child, many children actually, on a daily basis, and assist them to become better adults. Why? Why do we need to enable a child's? Because we, as a human race, depend on it. Growth in any form or matter doesn't just happen. It needs nurturing. A seed without soil and water won't become a tree. So it's not going to, growth doesn't happen from thin air, not for me, not for you, not for anybody. We must educate our youth to heal and excel and instill in them the tools to grow within, because it's with inner power. When your core is quiet and you know how to de-stress, the outside stresses won't trip you up. And we can change the world, because a peaceful mind does not harbor violence. And that is the end of my presentation. And I'm going to hand over to Hanunisha. And Hanunisha, you can direct any questions that somebody has to me. And I want to say very welcome to our WIN India General Manager. I saw she's attending earlier, and I hope WIN Pakistan is here, and that other ladies from WIN Africa, they might be disrupted by load shedding, because everywhere in the world there's a bit of load shedding now. But I'm so looking forward to hear from them when they manage to view this recording later. So Hanunisha, I'm handing back to you now.
Thank you, Francesca, for that presentation. I also facilitated the previous sessions that Francesca had, and it is always eye-opening, the things that you know you hear in these presentations. As always, when I think of epigenetics, I like the idea that you can change where you're going. You are not doomed to be what the past has told you you must be. You can change it, and I love that. So anyone that has questions can raise their hands. Also, if you have questions, you can put it on the chat. If you are not able to raise your hands or speak, feel free. We have now time to engage with Francesca. You know, Francesca, I also thought when you were speaking about breathing, it makes, you know, such a lot of sense. It's a simple activity, one might think, but it makes such a lot of sense when you explain it like that, and it actually has the scientific basis to why it works. You know, my parents and their parents used to say, just breathe in and count to 10, and then you do what you want. You think again what you want to do. And you know, when you were talking about it, I thought, yeah, you know, they really knew what what they were talking about, and there we have some scientific basis for that type of advice that they gave. So yes, breathing is definitely something that I'm going to take forward and see, you know, when you do an activity, even when you spoke about the gym, walking or doing what you do, the breathing, you know, I think it just centers it. It actually then, you know, brings your mind to the activity that you're doing, and yeah, it creates a better experience. It seems that it could create a better experience of what you are doing when you practice this breathing. But let me see the questions that we have.
I am very grateful to see when Pakistan and when India, they are in the house. And
Okay.
I am grateful to see that somebody from TUT is in the house. I'm so glad to see them. And what, tailing on what you said, Anisha, you know, there's the great philosopher Thich Nhat Hanh, who passed away recently. He was very, very much into the concept of conscious walking. In other words, walking barefoot and focus on your personal experience whilst you walk. It's almost like a walking meditation. And when we now think in terms of breath work, when a woman is in labor, what do we teach her? To breathe, because breathing assists your whole physiology, especially your neurological system. And with breathing properly, that woman can minimize the trauma for her and the baby that is coming into the world. It is just so crazy that somebody somewhere decided people had to breathe in, you know, with the lungs and constrict the diaphragm so that they have this little waist, and that is breathing. That is not breathing. Natural breathing is when you breathe with the diaphragm, not this peacock expansion of the lungs and the upper torso, and you know, the constriction of the diaphragm. We need to start listening to our bodies and harmonize with our physiology. And the moment we can do that, and we teach that to children, we can already really make a vast impact.
Thank you, Francesca. And welcome, people attendees that joined us from Pakistan and India. It's wonderful to know, you know, that we are reaching that far. And we are, you know, we are interested to hear, you know, the kinds of things that you deal with in Pakistan and in India as it relates to gender-based violence, children, as in the context of what Francesca has spoken about. So please feel free to leave a comment in the chat or raise your hand and talk to us. Francesca, at the moment, I see many messages of appreciation for the presentation. Yes, at the moment, there's no other questions, just appreciation for the chat.
I'm so glad. You know what? I know, you know, there are many ladies that messaged me and they couldn't come on because of load shedding. But that is the most wonderful thing for Luandu to record these sessions, and all the other sessions dealing very much at focusing on the changes and the amendments to the Gender-Based Violence Acts as well. And then, you know, for us to revisit, because every time we listen, I don't know, it often happens to me that I watch a movie, and the second time I watch it, I pick up something more in the dialogue or in the nuance that I didn't during the first time that I watched it. I'm not talking about James Bond movies. I'm really talking about substantial movies, you know. James Bond is cute, but I mean, yeah. So often when people listen to this, and I think when they revisit, when it's up on the YouTube channel, I think that women will read maybe more of the presentation or hear differently. Your attention is differently because you know you can rewind and rewatch. And very often, even myself on you know, National Geographic and things on YouTube, you just learn more the second time around. And I'm so grateful that this will be going up, you know, on the YouTube channel, and that people can revisit these presentations and take something personal and incorporate that for them in their daily lives. I'm very grateful for that. Thank you, Nomsa. I'm so glad that you appreciate it. And Naila is from Pakistan. Ah, Naila, I'm so glad I could help you today. And then, Hananisha, if there aren't any questions, then I'm going to thank you very much. Hananisha is our National Legal Manager for Legal Development at Legal Aid South Africa, and she has been moderating some of my talks now for quite a while, and I am very grateful for that, Hananisha. And Luwandu is in the call. He is the guy that's responsible for our recordings and so much more behind the scenes. That I'm also grateful for that. And I'm going to hand back then to you, Hananisha, if there are not any further questions, that you can close the session. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Francesca. I see that on the chat, I don't see any comments, and on the people, I don't see any hands. I do hope it's not because I have load shedding and, you know, my system is not working. But if you have a question and you didn't manage to put it on the chat while we are busy with this, please feel free to still put it on the chat later. The question still comes through even after the session has ended, and we can see it, and you know, Francesca might be able to respond to them even later, meaning after the chat. And then, so as I mentioned in the beginning, this is one of the series webinars in the series of webinars that the Pillar 3 in terms of the NSP Collaborative is doing. So on Thursday, we have another webinar that Francesca referred to earlier, where we will continue talking about this kind of topic and focus more on the trauma. So now, so please feel free to join us again on Thursday for the discussion. I feel, I get the sense that people think this was a lovely talk, as Naila writes that it's a discussion. It's not, how can I put this, it doesn't feel like training. It's sort of a discussion that we have, and a session about thinking about things, hearing things we might not have heard before, and then linking on to what Naila has said. You know, you can find things here to help yourself, but it's so great that you can even now find something that you can help other people with, and that is nice. So we see you on Thursday, same time, that is 2 o'clock on the webinar, and then we'll continue further discussions with Francesca. Thank you, Francesca. And we hope India and Pakistan will join us again. And if there's others there out there that is also part of WIN, we hope they also join us, and that our South African branches also join us, so that we also impart knowledge in South Africa. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And with that, we declare this session closed. Thank you again, Anunesha and Luwandu. And thank you for everybody for attending today. Thank you so much. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye. Thank you.
Bye.